The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, freezing Maribel Wright's blood in her veins as she watched the outlaws gallop away, her 4-year-old son Samuel's screams fading into the distance. One moment, she had been hanging laundry outside their modest homestead near Willow Creek, Colorado. The next, her world had shattered as 3 masked riders stormed their property, snatching her boy and disappearing into the rugged landscape. Spring of 1873 had just begun to soften the harshness of winter when Maribel's nightmare unfolded. Widowed for nearly a year after her husband Daniel died of pneumonia, she had managed to keep their small ranch functioning through sheer determination and the occasional help of neighbors. None of that mattered now. Nothing mattered except getting Samuel back. "Samuel!" Maribel screamed, her throat raw as she ran toward the stable. Her hands trembled as she attempted to saddle her mare, fingers fumbling with straps she'd managed hundreds of times before. Tears blurred her vision, and she wiped them away with angry swipes. 26 years old and alone in the world except for her precious boy, she couldn't bear to lose him too. A voice startled her from behind. "Madam, you're doing that wrong." Maribel spun around, grabbing the pitchfork leaning against the stall and pointing it toward the stranger who filled the stable doorway. He stood tall and imposing, dressed in trail-worn clothing, a dusty leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Get off my property." The man raised his hands slowly, showing he was no threat. "Name's Quinn Lawson. I was passing by and heard gunfire. Then I saw those men riding off with a child." His voice was deep and steady. "I take it that was your boy?" Maribel's grip on the pitchfork wavered. "My son. They took my son." The reality of it crashed over her again, and she fought to remain standing. "I need to go after them." Quinn Lawson stepped forward, and in the filtered sunlight through the stable slats, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin, dark hair, and piercing blue eyes that assessed her with a quick glance. A thin scar ran along his jaw, and his hands bore the calluses of a man accustomed to hard work. "Madam, those were the Farrow brothers and their cousin. I recognized Jesse Farrow's horse. They're wanted in 3 territories." Quinn carefully took the pitchfork from her trembling hands. "You go after them alone, you'll end up dead, and that won't help your boy." "I can't just do nothing," Maribel cried, her voice cracking. Quinn's expression remained calm as he efficiently tightened her horse's girth strap. "I didn't suggest doing nothing. I'm suggesting you let me help." "Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Something flickered across his face, a shadow of memory, perhaps, or old pain. "I've been tracking the Farrows for 2 weeks. They robbed a stagecoach near Durango, killed the driver." He paused. "And I don't need a reason to help a child in danger." Maribel studied him, desperate and wary all at once. She had no choice but to trust this stranger. "I'm going with you." Quinn shook his head firmly. "No, madam. That would slow me down. I can move faster alone, and I know these mountains better than most." When she began to protest, he added, "Every minute counts now. I can catch them if I leave immediately." "How do I know you'll bring him back?" Maribel whispered, her heart breaking at the thought of placing her son's fate in a stranger's hands. Quinn Lawson's eyes met hers, and something in their steady gaze made her breath catch. "You have my word. I'll bring your son home or die trying." He turned and walked to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion waiting outside. Maribel followed him, desperate. "Wait, please. At least tell me why you're after them. Are you a lawman?" Quinn mounted his horse with fluid grace, checking his rifle before sliding it into its scabbard. "I was a Texas Ranger." "Not anymore." His expression hardened. "The Farrows have hurt enough people. Your boy won't be another victim, Mrs. Wright." she supplied. Maribel Wright. And my son's name is Samuel. He's 4 years old. Her voice broke. He'll be so frightened. Something softened in Quinn's face. I'll find Samuel, Mrs. Wright. Stay here in case they're trying to draw you out. He tipped his hat and turned his horse. Lock your doors. Have a gun ready. Before she could say another word, he urged his horse forward, and within moments, horse and rider disappeared into the pine forest that bordered her property. Maribel stood watching long after he vanished, her heart pounding with fear and a desperate, fragile hope. Quinn Lawson followed the tracks with practiced ease, his eyes scanning the ground for signs others might miss. The Pharaoh gang wasn't being careful about covering their trail. They were moving fast, confident in their head start. It was their typical pattern. Violent, impulsive, and arrogant. He had been hunting them since they murdered his former partner 6 months ago in El Paso, a personal vendetta that had consumed him after he turned in his ranger badge. The tracks led higher into the mountains, and Quinn pushed his horse as hard as he dared on the treacherous terrain. His mind kept returning to the woman he'd left behind, the fear in her eyes, the determined set of her jaw despite her obvious terror. Maribel Wright was no stranger to hardship. He could see it in the calluses on her hands and the way she stood her ground even when frightened. As dusk approached, Quinn spotted smoke rising from a sheltered ravine ahead. He dismounted and secured his horse, proceeding on foot with his Winchester rifle. The voices reached him before he saw them: rough laughter and the slurred speech of men drinking around a campfire. Carefully, he edged closer until he could see the camp below. The 3 Pharaoh brothers lounged around the fire, passing a whiskey bottle. A smaller figure huddled against a tree, tiny wrists bound with rope. Samuel. The boy wasn't crying, but his little body was rigid with terror, his eyes wide in his dirt-smudged face. Quinn's jaw tightened as he overheard their conversation. We should have just killed her, the youngest Pharaoh, Luke, was saying. She saw our faces. Jesse, the oldest and the leader, took a swig from the bottle. The right woman's got no family, nobody to pay a ransom. But I know people who pay good money for orphans in Mexico. Work 'em in the mines. Quinn had heard enough. The boy wouldn't survive such a fate, and he couldn't take on all 3 men in a direct confrontation. He needed to be strategic. Backing away silently, he returned to his horse and waited for full darkness to fall. Hours later, when the outlaws had drunk themselves into a stupor, Quinn crept into their camp. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light for him to see Samuel, still tied to the tree but now sleeping fitfully. Moving with the silence born from years tracking Comanche raids, Quinn reached the boy and gently covered his mouth to prevent any sound as he woke him. Samuel's eyes flew open in terror, but Quinn put a finger to his lips and whispered, "I'm a friend of your mama's. I'm taking you home to her." The boy stared at him with wary hope as Quinn cut his bonds. One of the pharaohs snorted and rolled over in his sleep. Quinn froze, then quickly lifted Samuel into his arms when the outlaw settled again. The child clung to him, skinny arms wrapping around his neck in desperate trust. They had almost reached the edge of camp when a voice growled, "Where you think you're going with the merchandise?" Quinn turned to find Jesse Pharaoh standing unsteadily, his gun drawn. Without hesitation, Quinn dropped to one knee, shielding Samuel with his body as he drew his revolver. 2 shots echoed in the night. Jesse crumpled with Quinn's bullet in his chest, but not before his shot had grazed Quinn's left arm. The other pharaohs were scrambling for their weapons. Quinn scooped Samuel up and ran for his horse, bullets spitting dirt at his heels. He swung into the saddle with the boy clutched against him and spurred his horse forward, galloping into the darkness as shouts and gunfire faded behind them. "Hold tight, Samuel," he urged the terrified child. "We're going home to your mama." The boy trembled against him but didn't cry. "Are the bad men coming after us?" he whispered. "Don't you worry about them," Quinn assured him, though he knew the remaining pharaohs wouldn't give up easily. "I'll keep you safe." They rode hard through the night, Quinn taking paths only locals would know, doubling back across streams to confuse their trail. The wound on his arm burned, but he ignored it. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the outlaws, but Quinn didn't slow their pace. Samuel had finally fallen asleep against his chest, exhaustion overcoming fear. Looking down at the boy's tousled brown hair, so vulnerable in sleep, Quinn felt a protective fierceness that surprised him. He'd spent years hunting men like the pharaohs, but this was different. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about getting this child home to his mother's arms. Maribel hadn't slept. How could she? Her son was out there somewhere, frightened and alone with those monsters. She had spent the night alternating between pacing, praying, and standing on her porch with her husband's old shotgun, scanning the horizon for any movement. The neighbors from the nearest farm, the Andersons, had come when they heard the shots the previous day. Thomas Anderson and his sons had offered to form a search party, but Maribel had explained about Quinn Lawson. They'd looked skeptical, a stranger's word meant little in these parts, but they'd left 2 of their ranch hands to guard her property overnight, just in case. As morning broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Maribel stood on the porch, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in her hands. That's when she saw it, a single rider approaching from the east, silhouetted against the rising sun. Her heart leaped to her throat as she strained to see. The figure resolved into a man on horseback, and then she could hardly believe her eyes, a small form seated in front of him. "Samuel!" she screamed, dropping the cup and running toward them, heedless of the rocky ground beneath her bare feet. "Samuel!" As they drew closer, she could see her son's face, his eyes finding her, his little voice calling, "Mama! Mama!" Quinn Lawson slowed his horse to a walk, and before they had fully stopped, Maribel was there, arms reaching up. Quinn gently lowered Samuel to her, and the boy threw himself into his mother's embrace. Maribel fell to her knees, clutching her son, sobbing and laughing all at once, covering his dirty face with kisses. "My baby, she kept repeating, running her hands over him to assure herself he was real, he was whole. "The cowboy saved me from the bad men, Mama," Samuel said, his voice small but steady. "He shot one of them." Only then did Maribel look up at Quinn, still mounted on his horse. In the morning light, she could see the blood staining his left sleeve, the exhaustion lining his face. Yet there was something else there too, a warmth in his eyes as he watched their reunion. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. "Please come inside. You're hurt." Quinn hesitated, then nodded, dismounting stiffly. "The pharaohs will be looking for revenge. Jesse's dead, but Luke and Ethan are still out there. They know where you live." Fear gripped her heart again, but Maribel stood tall. Samuel clutched to her side. "Then we'll be ready for them." Quinn looked at her with something like admiration before swaying slightly. Maribel rushed forward to steady him, alarmed at the heat she could feel through his shirt, fever from his wound. "You need a doctor," she insisted. He shook his head. "Just need to clean it. I've had worse." His eyes were already scanning the property, assessing vulnerabilities. "We should get inside." With Samuel clinging to her skirts and Quinn limping slightly beside them, Maribel led the way to her modest home. Inside, she settled Samuel at the kitchen table with bread and jam. He was hungry but seemed otherwise unharmed while she gathered bandages and her meager medical supplies. Quinn sat awkwardly at her table, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. He looked different in the homey surroundings of her kitchen, less the dangerous gunslinger and more a tired, wounded man who had risked his life for strangers. "Let me see that arm," she said, approaching with a basin of water and clean cloths. He grimaced but removed his vest and rolled up his sleeve. The bullet had cut a deep furrow across his upper arm. Maribel cleaned the wound with steady hands, though her heart raced at their proximity. Quinn remained stoic, barely flinching as she worked, his attention split between her ministrations and keeping a watchful eye on the windows. "The pharaohs," she began hesitantly. "Will they come here?" Quinn's eyes met hers. "Eventually. They're not the type to forgive and forget. But they'll lick their wounds first, maybe wait a day or two." He glanced at Samuel, who was drowsily finishing his breakfast, the trauma and sleepless night catching up with him. "We have some time. We should alert the sheriff," Maribel suggested, wrapping clean bandages around Quinn's arm. A shadow crossed his face. "Sheriff Hollister's a good man, but his jurisdiction doesn't extend far into the mountains. And he's got just 2 deputies. He flexed his arm carefully, testing her handiwork. "Thank you, Mrs. Wright." "Maribel," she corrected softly. "And I'm the one who should be thanking you." Her voice caught. "If you hadn't come along when you did." "But I did," he said simply, as if rescuing children from outlaws was an everyday occurrence. Perhaps for him it once had been. After settling an exhausted Samuel in his bed for a much-needed nap, Maribel returned to find Quinn checking the locks on her doors and windows. She watched him move about her home with quiet efficiency, noting how he kept himself between potential entrances and Samuel's room. "You said you were a Texas Ranger," she said, breaking the silence. "What brought you to Colorado?" Quinn paused, his back to her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "The pharaohs killed my partner 6 months ago. Ambushed him while he was escorting a prisoner." His voice was flat, controlled. "The Rangers wanted to handle it officially. I wanted them dead. So I turned in my badge and went hunting." "That's why you were tracking them," Maribel realized. "Not because of the stagecoach robbery." He turned to face her. "That too. They've left a trail of bodies from Texas to here." His expression softened slightly. "But I'm glad I found them when I did. For the boys' sake." Maribel studied him. This complex man who carried such darkness yet had shown such gentleness with her son. "Will you stay? At least until we know they're not coming back." Quinn hesitated, conflict evident in his features. "I should track them while the trail's fresh. Finish this." "Please," she said, stepping closer. "Samuel feels safe with you here. And I?" She trailed off, unsure how to express the strange comfort she felt in his presence, despite having known him for less than a day. Whatever Quinn might have said was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Both of them tensed, Quinn drawing his pistol in one fluid motion as he moved to the window. "The Andersons," Maribel said with relief, recognizing her neighbors. "They came yesterday when they heard the gunshots." Quinn didn't holster his weapon until the Andersons were clearly visible. Thomas, his wife Eleanor, and their oldest son James, bearing baskets of food and concerned expressions. Only then did he step back from the window, though he remained alert. The reunion with Samuel and the explanation of his rescue took time. Thomas Anderson, a gruff but kind man who had been one of Daniel's few friends, shook Quinn's hand with genuine gratitude while Eleanor fussed over Samuel, declaring him thin as a rail and in need of her famous stew. Throughout it all, Quinn said little, accepting their thanks with quiet nods. "We'll spread the word about the pharaohs," Thomas promised as they prepared to leave. "Every ranch between here and town will be watching for them." Maribel walked them to the door, grateful for their support but anxious to return to the sanctuary of her home, where Samuel played contentedly by the fireplace under Quinn's watchful eye. The normality of the scene, a man and a boy in her living room as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, made her heart twist with unexpected emotion. That night, after Samuel was again tucked into bed, his small hand clutching Quinn's bandana like a talisman, Maribel found herself sitting across from Quinn at her kitchen table. The lamplight cast a warm glow between them as she poured him a cup of coffee. "He's taken a shine to you," she said softly. "He hasn't been that comfortable with anyone since his father died." Quinn looked down at his coffee. "He's a brave kid. Never cried once, even when he was scared to death." "Like his father," Maribel said, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "Daniel was the strongest man I knew, until pneumonia took him last spring." She traced the rim of her cup. "It's been hard, keeping this place going alone." "You've done well," Quinn observed. "Not many women could manage a homestead like this with a young child." Maribel felt herself flush under his assessment. "We get by. The Andersons help when they can, but they have their own place to run." She hesitated. "What will you do? After the Pharaohs, I mean?" Quinn looked out the window into the darkness. "Haven't thought that far ahead. Been tracking them so long. I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else." "Surely there's someone waiting for you somewhere?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. But Quinn just shook his head. "No one's waiting. My parents died years ago. No siblings. No wife." He offered a slight, self-deprecating smile. "Not much of a life for a woman, being married to a ranger. Always wondering if you'll come home." "Or a widow," Maribel said quietly. Their eyes met in shared understanding of loss and loneliness. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken passing in the silence. Then Quinn cleared his throat and stood. "I'll take first watch. You should get some rest." Maribel wanted to protest, to tell him he needed sleep more than she did after his ordeal, but she recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. This man would not rest until he was certain they were safe. "Wake me in a few hours," she insisted. "You need sleep too, especially with that wound." He nodded, though she suspected he had no intention of waking her. As she turned toward her bedroom, he called softly, "Maribel." She paused, looking back. It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Thank you for trusting me with your son." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. "You earned that trust, Quinn Lawson. And Samuel and I will never forget what you did for us." She slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with gunshots and Samuel's cries. Each time she woke with a start, she would listen for sounds in the house and hear the reassuring creak of floorboards as Quinn moved through his self-appointed patrol. His presence was a comfort she hadn't expected to feel again after Daniel died, the sense of being protected, of not facing the world's dangers alone. Dawn broke with no sign of the Pharaohs. Maribel found Quinn dozing in a chair by the front window, his rifle across his knees. He woke instantly at her approach, hands tightening on his weapon before he recognized her. "You were supposed to wake me," she chided gently, noting the dark circles under his eyes. He straightened, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. "You needed the rest more than I did." Before she could argue, Samuel padded into the room in his nightshirt, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His face brightened when he saw Quinn. "You're still here." Something softened in Quinn's expression. "Said I would be, didn't I?" Samuel nodded earnestly. "Can you show me how to use a lasso today? Mama says I'm too little, but I'm not." "Samuel," Maribel began, but Quinn interrupted with a small smile. "Maybe we'll start with something simpler. How about I show you how to groom a horse properly?" He glanced at Maribel for permission. The day unfolded with an unexpected peacefulness. Quinn taught Samuel how to brush down his horse, explaining each step with patience Maribel wouldn't have expected from a hardened former lawman. Samuel hung on his every word, following Quinn around like an eager shadow. After lunch, Quinn inspected the homestead's defenses, making small repairs to fences and checking sight lines from the house. Watching him work, sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms, Maribel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. It had been so long since a man had shouldered any of her burdens. So long since she'd allowed herself to notice a man as a woman might. The sound of galloping hooves shattered the afternoon's tranquility. Quinn was at her side instantly, rifle in hand, pushing her toward the house. "Get Samuel inside," he ordered, his voice taut with tension. But it wasn't the Pharaohs approaching. It was James Anderson, riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined in sharply, his young face grave. "Pharaohs hit the Miller place," he called out, barely waiting for his horse to stop. "Burned the barn, stole horses. Old man Miller took a bullet in the shoulder." His eyes found Quinn. "They left a message. Said they're coming for the ranger and the boy." Maribel felt her blood run cold. Quinn's expression didn't change, but she saw his knuckles whiten on the rifle. "When?" Quinn asked. "Few hours ago. Sheriffs gathered a posse, but they headed north, following a false trail most likely." James swung down from his saddle. "Pa sent me to warn you. He's organizing the neighbors, but it'll take time to gather everyone." Quinn nodded. "Thank you. Tell your father to keep everyone at their own properties. The Pharaohs are my problem." "Our problem," Maribel corrected firmly. When Quinn turned to her, she met his gaze without flinching. "They threatened my son. And this is my home." James looked between them, then nodded. "I'll ride back. Tell Pa what you said. But he won't like leaving you to face them alone." After James departed, Quinn turned to Maribel, his expression grim. "You should take Samuel and go with him. Stay with the Andersons until this is over." "No." Maribel stood her ground. "I'm not running from my home, and splitting up would just give them two targets." Quinn raked a hand through his hair in frustration. "Maribel, these men are killers. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when they took my son." Her voice shook, but her resolve was firm. "You can't face them alone, not with that arm. And you need someone watching your back." Their standoff was interrupted by Samuel's small voice from the porch. "Are the bad men coming back?" Quinn and Maribel exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together, for Samuel's sake. The day stretched into evening with no sign of the Pharaohs, but the tension never eased. Quinn helped Maribel move furniture to create defensive positions within the house, instructing her on the best places to take cover. He showed her how to reload his spare revolver, patiently correcting her grip and stance. "You're a natural," he said when she hit the center of a makeshift target he'd set up. "Steady hands." "Sewing and mending require steady hands too," she replied. But she couldn't deny the small surge of pride at his approval. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch while Samuel slept, unaware of the danger that might come with the dawn. During Maribel's shift, she found herself studying Quinn as he slept on the sofa. His features relaxed for once, vulnerability replacing the hard lines of vigilance. He had saved her son, was risking his life to protect them, and asked nothing in return. In the quiet darkness, she admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore. She was drawn to this man in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. When he woke for his shift, their hands brushed as she passed him the rifle. The brief contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. Their eyes met, and for a moment, she thought he might say something, might acknowledge whatever was growing between them. But he simply nodded toward her bedroom. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you at first light. The attack came just before dawn, that darkest hour when night still holds its grip but morning threatens at the edges of the world. The sound of a bottle breaking against the side of the house jerked Maribel from sleep. Quinn was already at her bedroom door. "Fire," he said grimly. "They're trying to smoke us out. Get Samuel." The smell of burning kerosene filled the air as Maribel rushed to her son's room. Samuel was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Come, sweetheart," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We need to go to the special hiding place." Quinn had already doused the flames along the eastern wall, but Maribel could see more fire flickering through the windows. The pharaohs were surrounding the house, setting fires from multiple directions. "Cellar," Quinn directed, helping her move the rug that concealed the trapdoor to the small root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. "Take Samuel down there. Stay quiet." "What about you?" Maribel clutched his arm. "You can't face them alone." A crash from the front of the house made them both turn. Luke Pharaoh's voice called out, "Come on out, Ranger. Bring the boy, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Quinn's expression hardened. "There's a back way out through the cellar. Tunnel comes out near the creek. Daniel showed me yesterday." At Maribel's surprised look, he added, "Smart man, your husband. New troubles might come someday." "If you think I'm leaving you, I'm right behind you," Quinn promised, but they both knew it for the lie it was. He cupped her face with one hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Maribel, please, I can't fight them and protect you both at the same time." Another crash, closer now. They were running out of time. Samuel tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I'm scared." The sound of her son's voice decided her. She nodded to Quinn, her throat too tight for words, and gathered Samuel in her arms. Quinn lifted the trapdoor. "Go. I'll buy you time." Maribel descended the ladder into the darkness, Samuel clinging to her neck. She looked up one last time to see Quinn silhouetted against the firelight from the windows. Their eyes met in a gaze that contained 1,000 unspoken words. Then he closed the trapdoor, and darkness enveloped them. In the cellar, Maribel felt her way along the rough stone walls, following them to the narrow tunnel Daniel had dug during the early years of their marriage. Samuel was silent against her shoulder, sensing the gravity of their situation even at his young age. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, not sure if she was reassuring him or herself. Above them, she could hear muffled shouts and then a series of gunshots that made her heart seize with terror. Quinn was up there alone, outnumbered, facing men who wanted nothing more than to kill him, and all because he had saved her son. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing her to crouch as she moved, one hand on the earthen wall for guidance. It seemed to go on forever, each step taking her farther from Quinn and whatever fate awaited him. When they finally emerged into the pale dawn light by the creek bank, Maribel set Samuel down and looked back toward their home. Smoke rose from the roof, and more gunshots echoed across the valley. "Mama, the bad men are hurting our house," Samuel said, his voice small. "And Mr. Quinn is still there." Maribel made her decision in that moment. Samuel listened carefully. "I need you to be very brave." She pointed to a hollowed log half hidden in the brush nearby. "I want you to hide in there, like we're playing the best game of hide and seek ever. Don't come out until I come get you, no matter what you hear. Can you do that for me?" Samuel nodded solemnly, his eyes huge in his pale face. "Are you going to help Mr. Quinn?" "Yes," she said, kissing his forehead. "He helped us, and now we need to help him." After making sure Samuel was safely concealed in the log, Maribel crept back toward the house, keeping to the cover of the trees. As she drew closer, she could see that one side of the house was fully ablaze, while two men, Luke and Ethan Farrow, she presumed were circling toward the front porch, firing periodically at the windows. There was no sign of Quinn. Was he injured? Dead? The thought sent a wave of grief and rage through her that shocked her with its intensity. Moving as silently as she could, Maribel approached the woodshed where Daniel had kept his hunting rifle. If she could reach it, she might be able to help Quinn or at least avenge him if she was too late. She had almost reached the shed when a voice drawled behind her. "Well now, Mrs. Wright, ain't you supposed to be inside with your boyfriend?" Maribel whirled to find Luke Farrow standing not 10 feet away, a cruel smile twisting his features. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25, but his eyes held a coldness that made her shiver. "Where's your boy?" he demanded, his pistol leveled at her chest. "Gone," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Far away from here by now. You'll never find him." Fury darkened Luke's face. "You're lying." "No, she's not." Quinn's voice came from behind Luke. "But she is distracting you." Luke started to turn, but he was too slow. Quinn's bullet took him in the back, and he collapsed face first into the dirt. Maribel stared in shock, first at the fallen outlaw, then at Quinn, who emerged from the shadow of the barn, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. "I told you to run," he said, his voice rough with anger and something that might have been fear. "And I couldn't leave you," she replied, moving toward him. "You're hurt." A shout from the front of the house reminded them that Ethan Farrow was still alive and armed. Quinn grabbed Maribel's arm and pulled her toward the cover of the trees. "The last one's the most dangerous," he muttered. "Ethan's smarter than his brothers. And now he's desperate. Samuel's hidden by the creek," Maribel told him as they crouched behind an old oak. "In the log cave." Relief washed over Quinn's features. "Good. Stay here. I'll finish this." But before he could move, a bullet splintered the bark just above their heads. Ethan Farrow stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle aimed at them. "You killed both my brothers," he called out, his voice eerily calm. "Seems only fair I kill both of you." Quinn pushed Maribel lower behind the tree. "When I move, you run," he whispered. "Get to Samuel and don't look back." Quinn, no, but he was already moving, rolling away from the tree and firing as he went. Ethan's shot went wide, and Quinn disappeared into the underbrush, drawing Ethan's attention away from Maribel. The two men exchanged fire, moving in a deadly dance through the trees. Maribel should have run then. Every instinct screamed at her to go to Samuel, to take him and flee as far as they could. But something stronger held her in place, the certainty that if she left, Quinn Lawson would die fighting her battle. Moving silently through the woods as Daniel had taught her years ago, Maribel circled behind where she had last seen Ethan. The two men were still exchanging gunfire, but Quinn's shots were coming less frequently. Was he running out of ammunition? Or was he hurt worse than she'd realized? She found Ethan crouched behind a boulder, reloading his rifle. Her foot snapped a twig, and he whirled, raising his gun toward the sound. Maribel didn't hesitate. She charged forward with a cry, tackling him before he could fire. They tumbled to the ground, Ethan's rifle flying from his grasp. He was stronger, instantly gaining the upper hand as he pinned her beneath him, his hands closing around her throat. "Should have run while you had the chance, woman," he snarled, his face contorted with rage. Spots danced before Maribel's eyes as she fought for breath, clawing at his hands. Just as darkness began to close in, the pressure suddenly released. Ethan's weight was torn away, and through blurred vision, she saw Quinn standing over them, his face a mask of cold fury as he delivered a savage blow to Ethan's jaw. The two men grappled, Quinn's strength clearly fading as blood seeped through his shirt where his wound had reopened. Ethan pressed his advantage, landing a blow that sent Quinn staggering back. The outlaw reached for his knife, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "You're dead, Ranger," he taunted, advancing on Quinn. "And when I'm done with you, I'll find the boy." The gunshot echoed through the trees, cutting off Ethan's words. He looked down in surprise at the red stain blooming across his chest, then collapsed to his knees. Behind him stood Maribel, Quinn's dropped revolver still smoking in her hands. "You stay away from my son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan Farrow toppled forward, dead before he hit the ground. For a moment, neither Maribel nor Quinn moved. Then, as if a string had been cut, Quinn sank to his knees, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. Maribel dropped the gun and rushed to him, supporting him as he swayed. "I've got you," she said, helping him lean against a tree. "Just hold on." Quinn's breathing was labored, his skin alarmingly pale beneath its tan. "Samuel?" he managed to ask. "Safe, right where I left him." She tore a strip from her petticoat to press against his wound. "We need to get you to a doctor." He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Maribel, you saved my life." "You saved ours first," she reminded him, tears threatening as the events of the past days crashed over her. "We're even now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Didn't do it to keep score." The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. For a terrible moment, Maribel feared more outlaws, but then she recognized Thomas Anderson's voice calling her name. "Here!" she shouted. "We need help." Within moments, the clearing was filled with neighbors and the sheriff's men, summoned by James Anderson when he'd seen the smoke from Maribel's burning home. Dr. Wilson, who had been part of the posse, immediately attended to Quinn's wounds while Thomas organized men to extinguish what remained of the house fire. Maribel left Quinn in the doctor's capable hands and ran to retrieve Samuel, who emerged from his hiding place with remarkable composure for a 4-year-old. He clung to her, burying his face in her neck as she carried him back to where the neighbors had gathered. "Is Mr. Quinn okay?" he asked anxiously, spotting the former ranger being tended near the remains of their front porch. "He will be," Maribel assured him, hoping it was true. "Thanks to you being so brave and doing exactly what I told you." Sheriff Hollister approached her, hat in hand. "Mrs. Wright, I'm sorry we weren't here sooner. When we realized the Farrows had laid a false trail." He glanced at the bodies being loaded onto wagons. "Looks like you and Lawson handled things, though." "Quinn did most of it," Maribel said, exhaustion suddenly weighing her down. "He saved us. Multiple times." The sheriff nodded. "Known Quinn since he was wearing a ranger's badge. Good man." He looked at the smoldering ruins of her home. "You'll stay with the Andersons while we sort this out?" "They've offered their place." Maribel nodded gratefully, her eyes straying back to Quinn, who was now sitting up, arguing with Dr. Wilson about something. Even wounded and exhausted, there was a strength to him that drew her gaze. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. The community rallied around Maribel and Samuel, with neighbors helping to salvage what they could from the damaged house and beginning the work of rebuilding. Quinn recovered at the Anderson farm, his wounds healing slowly but steadily under Dr. Wilson's care and Eleanor Anderson's mothering. Maribel found herself drawn to the room where he convalesced, bringing him meals and sitting with him as he regained his strength. Samuel was a frequent visitor too, perching on the edge of Quinn's bed to show him treasures found in the Andersons' creek or to ask endless questions about being a Texas Ranger. "He admires you," Maribel observed one evening as she changed Quinn's bandages. Samuel had just left after an extended session of Quinn teaching him to whittle a small horse. Quinn looked thoughtful. "He's a good kid. Smart. Reminds me of myself at that age, always full of questions." "Is that when you decided to become a ranger?" she asked, curious about this man who had become so important to them so quickly. No, that came later, after Comanche raiders hit our settlement. Something dark flashed in his eyes. I was 12. Lost my little sister in the attack. Maribel's hands stilled on the bandage. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but she could see the old pain beneath the casual gesture. It was a long time ago, but it's why I understand what you felt when Samuel was taken. That fear. It changes you. Their eyes met, and Maribel felt that now familiar pull between them, a connection forged in crisis but deepening with each passing day. She finished wrapping his side and stood, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had become. Dr. Wilson says you'll be well enough to travel soon, she said, gathering the old bandages. Quinn nodded, his expression unreadable. Sheriff offered me a deputy position. Said the county could use a man with my experience. Hope fluttered in Maribel's chest. You're considering staying? Thinking about it. He hesitated, then added, depends on a few things, such as. Her heart was beating too fast, the implications of his words hanging in the air between them. But before Quinn could answer, Thomas Anderson appeared in the doorway. Maribel, thought you'd want to know the roof's finished on your place. You and Samuel could move back in by week's end, if you've a mind to. The news should have delighted her, but all Maribel could think was that moving back home meant leaving Quinn here at the Andersons, disrupting the rhythm they'd established during his recovery. That's wonderful news, she managed. Thank you, Thomas, for everything. After he left, an awkward silence fell between her and Quinn. Finally, he said, your home will be good as new soon. Better, from what I've seen of the work they're doing. Yes, she agreed, though her home didn't feel like home anymore without. She stopped the thought before it could fully form. I should let you rest. That night, unable to sleep, Maribel slipped outside to sit on the Andersons' porch swing. The moon cast silver light across the fields, and in the distance, she could just make out the shape of her own home being rebuilt. The creak of floorboards announced Quinn's presence before she saw him. He moved carefully, still favoring his injured side, but he was stronger each day. Without a word, he sat beside her on the swing, his shoulder a warm presence against hers in the cool night air. Couldn't sleep? She asked after a comfortable silence. Too much thinking, he admitted, about what comes next. Maribel gathered her courage. And what does come next, Quinn? He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by moonlight. I've been a ranger most of my adult life, then a bounty hunter. Never stayed in one place long, never had a reason to. And now? She prompted softly when he paused. Quinn's hand found hers on the swing between them, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. Now I'm wondering if it's time to stop running, if there might be something worth staying for. Maribel's breath caught. Quinn, I know it's fast, he said quickly. Too fast, maybe. You barely know me. And there's Samuel to consider. He looked down at their joined hands. I'm not asking for anything, Maribel. Just telling you that the thought of riding away from here from you and Samuel feels wrong in a way I can't explain. Maribel turned toward him fully then, lifting her free hand to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jaw. When Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over, that Samuel and I would be alone, and that would be enough. Her voice trembled slightly. Then you rode into our lives, and suddenly I'm feeling things I never expected to feel again. Quinn's eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? In answer, Maribel closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started tentative but quickly deepened. Quinn's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer as the swing swayed gently beneath them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing faster, and Maribel felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "Definitely a good thing," she whispered, and was rewarded with a rare, full smile that transformed Quinn's features, making him look younger and unburdened. "Mama!" Samuel's sleepy voice came from the doorway. "Why are you kissing Mr. Quinn?" They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, and Maribel felt herself blushing furiously as she turned to her son. "Samuel, you should be in bed." Samuel padded across the porch in his nightshirt, seemingly unconcerned by the scene he'd interrupted. He climbed onto the swing between them, yawning hugely. "Is Mr. Quinn going to live with us when our house is fixed?" Maribel exchanged a startled look with Quinn over Samuel's head. We haven't discussed that, sweetheart." "But you like him," Samuel pointed out with a child's straightforward logic. "And he likes you. I heard him tell Mr. Anderson so." Quinn cleared his throat, looking both embarrassed and amused. "Did you now?" Samuel nodded earnestly. "And I like you too. You could sleep in the spare room. Or with Mama, like Papa used to." He yawned again. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" With that abrupt change of subject, Samuel leaned against Quinn's side and promptly fell back asleep, leaving the adults in stunned silence. After a moment, Quinn began to laugh softly, careful not to wake the boy. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured, his arm carefully cradling Samuel's small form. Maribel couldn't help but laugh too, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. He doesn't understand. He understands exactly what he wants," Quinn said, his expression softening as he looked at the sleeping child. "And I can't say I disagree with him." Their eyes met again, and Maribel felt a surge of hope for a future she hadn't dared imagine. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Ranching is hard work, and I'm still learning myself. And Samuel can be a handful." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Quinn replied. "And Samuel." He looked down at the boy with an expression that made Maribel's heart swell. "Samuel's the kind of handful I'd be proud to help raise." 2 months later, Maribel stood in the doorway of her rebuilt home, watching as Quinn and Samuel worked together in the newly constructed corral. Quinn was teaching the boy to groom the yearling colt he'd bought from the Andersons, their dark heads bent together in concentration. Samuel's laughter carried across the yard as the colt nuzzled his palm for treats. The house behind her was better than before, larger, with sturdy walls and a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the coming winter. The community had rallied around them, turning tragedy into an opportunity for renewal. But the greatest renewal had been in her heart. Quinn spotted her watching and straightened, saying something to Samuel before walking toward her. In the months since the attack, he had healed completely, his lean frame filling out with regular meals and honest work. He'd taken the deputy position with Sheriff Hollister but spent most of his time at the ranch, throwing himself into learning the business with the same dedication he'd once given to tracking outlaws. "Admiring the view?" he teased as he reached her, pulling her into his arms. Maribel went willingly, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Maybe I was," she admitted when they parted. "Samuel looks happy." "He is happy," Quinn assured her, his arms still around her waist. "We all are." And it was true. The nightmares that had plagued Samuel after his abduction had gradually faded, replaced by excited chatter about the ranch and his growing collection of whittled animals from Quinn. The bond between man and boy had deepened into something that looked remarkably like love, a fact that filled Maribel with gratitude daily. As for her own heart, it had opened in ways she'd never expected. Quinn Lawson was not Daniel, would never be Daniel, but he had brought his own kind of joy into their lives. His quiet strength, his unfailing protectiveness, his surprising tenderness all had conspired to make her fall deeply, irrevocably in love with him. "I have something for you," Quinn said, reaching into his pocket. Been carrying it around for a week, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate patterns. Maribel's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," Quinn explained, a rare nervousness in his voice. "I've kept it all these years, never thinking I'd have someone to give it to." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Maribel Wright, I love you. I love Samuel. I want to build a life with you both if you'll have me." Tears blurred Maribel's vision as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love and hope that had been growing in her heart. "Is that a yes?" he murmured against her lips, his own smile evident in his voice. "Yes," she laughed through her tears. "1,000 times yes." A whoop of joy from the corral made them turn. Samuel was watching them, his face split in a wide grin. "Did you ask her? Did Mama say yes?" Quinn laughed, reaching out an arm to beckon the boy over. "She said yes, partner. Looks like you're stuck with me." Samuel ran to them, and Quinn lifted him easily with one arm, the three of them embracing in the golden afternoon light. Maribel felt a completeness she had never expected to find again after losing Daniel, a family rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy, stronger for having been tested by fire. "Does this mean I can call you Pa now?" Samuel asked Quinn, his little face serious. Quinn's eyes met Maribel's over their son's head, love and gratitude reflected in their depths. "If that's what you want, Samuel, nothing would make me prouder." Samuel considered this with the gravity of a child making an important decision. "I think I'll call you Pa," he declared finally. "But I'll remember my first Pa too." "That sounds perfect," Maribel said, her heart full to bursting as Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Maribel thought of the terrible day that had begun this journey, the moment when Outlaws had taken her son and shattered her world. She could never have imagined then that from such darkness would come the light now filling her life. That a stranger's promise to bring her child home would lead to not just Samuel's return, but to a second chance at love and happiness for all of them. Quinn's arm tightened around her waist, as if he could read her thoughts. "Welcome home," he whispered, and Maribel knew he meant not just to this place, but to the haven they had created together, a family bound not by blood but by choice, by courage, and by a love that had been forged in the fires of adversity and emerged unbreakable. In the years that followed, the ranch flourished under their combined care. Quinn's skills as a tracker and horseman complemented Maribel's knowledge of the land, and together they built something neither could have managed alone. Samuel grew tall and strong, with his mother's gentle heart and his adoptive father's steady courage. 2 years after their wedding, he was joined by a baby sister, Emma Rose, who had Quinn wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The stories of how they came together, of the outlaw raid, Quinn's rescue, and their stand against the Pharaoh brothers became family lore, told and retold around the fireplace on winter evenings. But for Quinn and Maribel, the most important part was never the danger or the drama. It was the moment when a lone cowboy had appeared at their darkest hour, a child safe in his saddle, and changed the course of all their lives. Some said it was chance that brought Quinn Lawson to their homestead that fateful day. Maribel knew better. Some connections were written in the stars long before they were lived on earth, and theirs was one of them. A love born from courage and sacrifice, tested by fire, and destined to last a lifetime.